Welcome to the Acting Notes Podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things acting, from tips and tricks to business information. I'm your host, Justin Powell, and today I'm going to share with you some stories. Some stories about actors and their process and their craft on some of our favorite movies. I'll explain. So I really love acting. I made a podcast about it. I love the craft of it. I love the stories about it. I've always been such a huge fan, and so I've gobbled up many stories. I've watched so many interviews with actors. I have read many different biographies. I just love hearing about the craft. I love hearing about how actors gave performances that we loved. And so I have a lot of stories that really inspire me, and I want to share them with you today so that hopefully they inspire you too. So the first one, I just want to talk a bit about one of my favorite actors, Marlon Brando. Maybe you've heard of him, I don't know. He changed the face of acting. I've talked about this before, but before Brando came along, most actors were just doing presentational acting. They came from the theater, where you had to be heard in the back row. So they would always enunciate very well. They would make sure that the audience could very easily pick up whatever was going on for the character. But Brando changed all of it. He made it far more natural. He found that he would have these big pauses in moments, and he would, this is different doing it on video. I feel much more pressure. But he would pause, he would find more subtle nuances to show a real person on camera. Sometimes you couldn't understand what Brando was saying, and that's because that happens in life. I'm an example of that right now. I am trying to get words across to you so that hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. But it's a process. I'm finding the words as I go. And Brando was able to deliver his lines in such a natural way that it always felt organic. His performances always felt like you were just peeking in. You were a fly on the wall watching this real human being live. But one of my favorite stories about Brando is when he was in an acting class. I want to say it was Stella Adler's. There was a moment where the teacher said, "I would like you all to act like a chicken, but you just found out that a nuclear bomb is about to be dropped." And most of the students began flapping their wings and running around in a panic. But Brando went over to the corner and he laid an egg. And the teacher asked him afterwards, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, a chicken doesn't know anything about a nuclear bomb." Which is so true, right? And I think the fun thing that we can take away from that is to always find the truth of the moment, right? Now, in that circumstance, I'm sure the teacher would say something like, "Well, I told you to do it though, so I want you to do it that way." But I think staying true to what you know to be true is always a more interesting choice anyway. And something else we can take away from that is, there have been so many times in my own acting career that I've joined an acting class or a theater company, and it's very easy to get swept away in the idea that one person has all of the answers for you. And part of that, not always, part of that is because I think a lot of acting teachers and studios, they try to sell you that. They try to give you this idea that if you stay with me, kid, you're going to make it. Now, sometimes that's the case, and sometimes I'm sure that is their total belief, but it also happens to be a very good thing to keep you around and keep spending money on their classes. So I think the thing to remember there is ultimately you are the best teacher you have. Your instinct, your belief in yourself, in your craft. So I always say, take classes. I think you should always be learning. But there's a certain point when you're in a class where you realize that you've grown out of it. You've outgrown it is a better way to say that. And when that time comes, don't be afraid to move on. You need to challenge yourself. You should always feel uncomfortable as you're growing. That is the key to growth. One of my other favorite stories comes from Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, he and Tarantino have worked together a couple of times. And my personal favorite performance of his is in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In that movie, there is a sequence where his character goes back into his trailer after giving a bad performance on set. And he starts berating himself. He starts going at it. It's one of the most funny sequences in the film. And the awesome thing about that is that it was not in the script. Tarantino went to him and he said, I need you to give me a taxi driver moment. And DiCaprio improvised that and found it. So what we can take away from that is the understanding of character, right? He knew his character so well. It was so in line with who that character was. So he was able to improvise and find all of this juicy stuff in the moment. I mean, you could take another lesson from DiCaprio when he did Inglourious Basterds, or not Inglourious Basterds, I'm sorry, that was Brad Pitt, obviously. When he did Django Unchained, you know, there's that very famous scene where he has blood all over his hand. And at this point, we know, right? He cut his hand on the glass and he just kept going with it. Now, I'm not saying you should get injured on set. Please don't take that away. But what I am saying is you can use accidents that happen to motivate your character. It would have been all too easy for him to call cut, and frankly, if he did, no harm, no foul, right? You're bleeding. I think that is a pretty good reason to say, yeah, we got to stop this scene for a second. But there are going to be accidents when you are acting. Some of them might be drastic like that, but some of them might be as small as, you know, someone knocks over a glass or someone trips. You can either choose to break out of it in that moment or accept that in life those things happen. So think of it instead not as an accident, but as a gift. Use that gift. One of my other favorite stories, and I've brought it up on the podcast before, is about Jack Nicholson. You know, because many times as actors, we can get daunted when we feel like we're just not as good as the pros, you know? We see their performances on screen and we're like, I'm not that good. It takes me forever to get to a good spot. And we forget that oftentimes they have many takes that they are choosing and cutting and splicing from, taking a good moment from here, another good moment from here. That's something that happens. And one of my favorite stories about Jack Nicholson is from someone who was on set watching him work. And Jack Nicholson has 4 Oscars. They were watching him work, and they said for the first 9 takes, Jack wasn't very good. And it was obvious. Everyone on set could feel it. It even seemed like Jack kind of knew it too. But by take 10, he dropped in, and he was the Jack Nicholson that we know. So, the lesson that we can take away from that is to give ourselves a little bit of grace. If an actor who's won 4 Oscars can take his time finding the character, finding the scene, then so too can we. Give yourself some grace and let yourself explore. Another one of my favorite actor stories is from Matthew McConaughey in the movie Interstellar. If you have seen that movie, then you probably know the scene I'm talking about. When Matthew McConaughey's character watches the video of his kids, and because he's been in space, you know, time is relative, it changes for him, so he's kind of aging at the same pace, but years have passed on Earth, and so he sees, you know, the 9-year-old girl or whatever she was, now as a woman. She's an adult woman in this video. It's the first time he's seeing his kids as they've aged up, realizing he's missed out on their childhood. He has missed out on years of their life. And the way he breaks down is so human. It's so powerful. The wonderful thing about that is McConaughey did that on the first take. So I guess that's a total difference from the Jack Nicholson story, right? But here's how it's kind of similar. McConaughey knew with a scene like that, you're only really going to get one shot at it. He can only see that footage once and really be surprised by it, really take it all in for the first time. And he told Nolan that. He said, listen, we got this one take. I think this is the one we got to use. I think they did one more take after that, but sure enough, it was that first take. So McConaughey knew to set himself up well. And that's something that we can do, you know. Try to find ways in your projects that you can be surprised. Sometimes actors will come up to me and say, hey, I might like improvise a line here or something. And I'll always tell them, don't tell me that. I don't want to know. I would rather be surprised in the moment and just get to roll with what you're doing. And they might say, you know, well, I don't want to throw you off. And to me, I'm like, no, I want to be thrown off. I think that some of our best acting can come when we are not planning ahead, when we're not in control. That's where the juicy stuff occurs. So you want to be surprised by your scene partner, and you want to surprise your scene partner too. Now, of course, we do have to do that in a safe way. There are times when I think the better thing to do is talk with your scene partner beforehand and just ask them what their boundaries are. if you know, like, hey, I got a bad shoulder, so just don't hit my shoulder, things like that. Or, I always think the bare minimum, the obvious one, is just like, no swimsuit areas, no touching there. It obviously changes on the scene, if it's like a romance scene or a sex scene. I don't know why I said that like I'm a grandfather. If it's a sex scene, that might be different. But that is usually something that's coordinated with the intimacy coordinator so that, there is more safety on set. But when you're having just a scene with someone, maybe it's a breakup scene or something like that, and you want to know how far you can go, talk to your other actor beforehand. I don't think you need to tell them, like, on this line, I'm going to hit the wall. But ask them what their boundaries are. Ask them how they feel safe. And if it is a very intense emotional scene, maybe talk to the director too and see if there is a way that the person can get out of it if they do just feel too uncomfortable. Another lesson I love, a story I love, is about the late, great John Cazale. Sorry if my eyes are darting. My cat's about to jump on my lap. I brought this up on the podcast before, but in the movie The Deer Hunter, there's a scene very early on where they're at the wedding and they are about to take a picture of all the groomsmen. And then John Cazale comes running in late. And just before they snap the photo, you watch him look down, realize his fly's down, and zip it up. And in that moment, we have such a clear understanding of this character, of who this guy is. And that wasn't in the script. There was nothing about his physicality. This was a small moment that John Cazale found to show us the character. So that is something we can take away from it. Come here, to find ways to show who our character is in physicality. That can be a moment of improv too, right? We don't need to improv by always just doing lines. We can improv with behavior. Sometimes that's even more interesting because it lets the audience read into it. It lets them try to figure out, what does that mean? What does this say about that guy that he would do something like that? So find ways that you can improv. Find physical behavior that's unique and tells us something about the character. Sorry, give me a cat petting break. When we get back, we'll talk some more about some acting stories. And in the meantime, I'm going to pet this cat. Those of you who are listening, my cat's on my lap. So, watch the video next time. And welcome back. So, let's talk about a couple more stories and what we might be able to take away from them. I'm going to go back to Brando with this story. It's just a story I really like. I don't know if it's necessarily one that we could take a lot of lessons from, but I really enjoy the story. When Brando, hello again, did Apocalypse Now, he showed up a month late to set. I think he was about 50 pounds overweight than what the director, Francis Ford Coppola, and he had talked about. And he basically came in and said, yeah, I'm not going to say any of these lines, and I wrote my own monologue. And listen, you got to get to a certain place where you can do something like that and it actually make it into the film. And you don't just get fired right away. And Brando had a very interesting career, right? Where, he was so incredibly good, but he was very conflicted as well. He had a kind of rough personal life. He was sometimes very difficult to work with. But I don't know, if you watch that monologue, the snail on a razor's edge, I think that's the line. It's incredible. It's so good. And I do think, I guess the lesson we can take away from that is, you gotta bring some elements of your own artistic approach into the process. We can get very comfortable just trying to be people pleasers, just trying to do everything right and not take our time for what we need. And there are ways to do that without being a total jerk. I remember I did a film last year, and there was a scene that I had to come in, I had to walk in this room and just punch this guy. And the whole thing was I was at work, so like initially as I approached him, I had to be kind of calm, and then when I walked into the other room, I just hit him and all the rage comes out. We did the first take, and I remember the director being like, I need more. That wasn't enough rage. I need more rage from you. And so I told him, hey, can you tell the sound guy that right before we roll here, you're going to say action, I'm going to scream. I'm going to let out a scream of anger, and then I'm going to jump into the scene. And the director looked at me kind of confused, but he said, okay, and told the sound guy, because I didn't want to blow out their eardrums. And the second take, was much better. We didn't do any more after that. He said he got it. And that was just me taking some ownership of my process, right? I could have tried to be a people pleaser and just been like, okay, sure, let me try it again. But I think we would have been there longer and we wouldn't have found something that worked so quickly. So you have to be able to understand your own process in a way that lets you ask for what you need. And again, there's balance to this, right? I hear those stories, here's a bad story that we could talk about. I think Jim Carrey's a wonderful actor, to be clear. But in Man on the Moon, he felt so in line with his character that there were days where he would just say he was done working. He would say, I'm done working for the day, even though they had more stuff to shoot. And, I think that's just a very mean thing to do. That is something that is incredibly selfish. Everyone else who's on set that day, who is trying to work, who's getting paid to work, is now suddenly not working because you have decided that this is important for your process. So I talk about this sometimes. I think you can have any process you want. I really do. As long as that process is not hurting other people in some way. If you want to be method and ask people to refer to you by your character name, you can do that. Now, if someone's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that, I don't think you can make them. You can ask, and if they do it, great. If they don't, you got to live with that. And something else Brando does, I think I maybe already even talked about this on this episode, but I'm shooting a lot today. Today is like a big day of making content, so forgive me. But one thing that Brando would do often is he would cross out lines and say, I can act this, I can act that. And I think the thing that is so cool about that is that it's true, right? Now, you have to have a specific relationship with the director. I've had the fortune of reworking with directors who I've done stuff with in the past, and when that's the case, I will often talk to them about things like that. I'll say, hey, this line here, I think I can cut it. I think I can just show that in the performance. And usually that's better, right? It's always better, I think, to see behavior than just dialogue, especially if it's dialogue saying like, I just feel so sad right now, or something where we're having to explain the character's feelings. If we can show that through behavior, through physicality, that's always more engaging. Another story I love is about Viola Davis, who I think is one of our best actors alive. She is so incredible. And honestly, the other thing I love about her is if you listen to any interview she gives on acting, she is so forthcoming with her process. She shares so much. And I love that because I feel like a lot of interviews I watch, not all of them, but oftentimes you just hear actors that say like, I don't want to talk about process. I don't know. It is what it is. And I mean, they're kind of right. But at the same time, I love when anyone can give us, a peek under the hood. And Viola Davis, when she was doing Fences with Denzel, they rehearsed her big monologue many times. But on the day where they actually shot, after he said his last line, she paused. She sat there for about 30 seconds to the point where the crew wasn't really sure what to do. But Denzel, being the director, he knew not to call cut. He knew this was part of it. And that stillness and that moment is something that helped fuel that just incredible monologue. It is so unbelievably good. If you haven't seen Fences, you should definitely check it out. Fantastic performances in there. I have one little tidbit of not liking it, which is this. It's very silly, but there's a scene where they're drinking moonshine, and I don't know where the continuity person was that day, but they were not on set. Because every shot, that moonshine's at a different level, man. It is all over the place. Another story I really love is about Michelle Williams in one of my favorite films, Manchester by the Sea. If you've not seen that film, that is a tear-jerker. My goodness. Highly recommend. But in the film, we finally see Michelle Williams' character confront Casey Affleck's character. They used to be married. There was a horrible tragedy that essentially broke them apart. And this is the first time she's really had a chance alone with him since that tragedy. Kenneth Lonergan, the director and writer, told her on the day, told her as she was preparing rather, just to not prepare it too much. He trusted that she'd be able to find her way through it. And on the day, similar to Viola Davis, when they were filming, she paused for a whole minute trying to think of what to say. Part of it being that she wasn't fully prepared on that scene because Kenneth Lonergan told her that. And the rawness of that performance, the beauty that you see in it is, I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. Now, I'm an emotional dude, it is what it is, but it is a remarkable performance, and it's something that I think we need to find in our work. We need to find a way to let the scene happen to us, right? Sometimes we think, the more we try to control our performances and our scenes, the worse it is. Joaquin Phoenix always says, whenever he has an idea for the character or a plan, that's when it's at its worst. That's when something doesn't work. But when he goes in and just allows things to happen, that's where the good stuff comes. So we really need to do that in our own acting as well. All right, I got one more story, and this story, in all honesty, has nothing to do with acting. It's just, I'm talking stories here. I want to share it because it's one of my favorite stories. There was a philosopher by the name of Diogenes, and Diogenes was a cynic. He was basically this person that would go up to people in the street and start barking at them. He would walk around naked. He was kind of a crazy dude. One day, he met Alexander the Great, when Alexander the Great was at the height of his powers. And he walked over to Diogenes, who was laying out on the ground. And the first thing that Diogenes said to the most powerful man in the world was, "Can you move? You're blocking my sun." Because he was sunbathing, and Alexander was blocking him. And then there's another famous quote where Alexander the Great said to him, "If I were not Alexander, I would want to be Diogenes." And Diogenes replied, "If I were not Diogenes, I would also want to be Diogenes." Banger of a line. But that's not going to be the last story. I can't end it on a philosophy story. That's a silly way to end an acting podcast. So instead, I'll end it on this. There's a great film with Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier. Now, in the film, Olivier is a very, well, not in the film, this is just in life. Olivier is a very kind of classically trained actor. He is someone who is all about process, about, being able to repeat the result, the technical aspects of performance. Whereas Hoffman was very method, very much like he has to live the role to bring it to life. And they were doing a scene where Hoffman's character was supposed to be incredibly tired, out of breath. And so Hoffman ran around the set 15, 20 times and then landed completely out of breath. And Olivier looked at him and said, "My dear boy, have you tried acting?" And I think that's great. I think the thing that we can take away from that is, because both performances are incredible in the movie. Both styles have their own merit. And that's the thing. There are many ways to slice an onion. Is that the expression? I don't know if that's the expression. There are many ways to get there. We have to find our own path to get there. And also, we have to have no apologies for how we do it. Now, again, really quick, that doesn't mean you should say, the way I get there is by punching my co-star or pulling a Jared Leto and sending dead rats to my co-stars. Not like that. But you have to have some trust in your process. So that's the thing. Ultimately, we have to be willing to do what we need to make our part come to life. So thanks for listening to the Acting Notes podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe. Leave a rating on Spotify. Let me know in the comments what kind of episodes you might want to see in the future. Share this with people. It always helps us grow. If you appreciate what I'm doing here at The Acting Notes, you can give The Acting Notes a follow at Instagram at The Acting Notes and give myself a follow at Justin_R_Powell. I also have a Ko-Fi, a coffee, whatever it is. So you can head over there and give a donation if you'd like. You don't have to. Of course you don't have to. I'll keep making this, but hey, it would be appreciated. And I think that's it. Yeah. Thanks again for listening to The Acting Notes. Have a great day. Peace.